The diplomatic lounge of Gateway Olympus was buzzing with nervous energy. Servers rushed between tables, diplomats checked their formal wear one last time, and security personnel stood at attention. Tonight wasn't just another state dinner. Tonight they were hosting the Xantharian Empire. James Mitchell stood near the kitchen entrance, adjusting his bow tie for the 5th time. He'd been working as head waiter at the Terran Wing restaurant for 3 years now, and he'd served his share of important guests. Ambassadors, trade ministers, even a few celebrity explorers. But an actual empress? That was a whole different level. The doors opened and the room fell silent. Empress Velshera entered like a force of nature. Her crimson robes seemed to move with their own life, flowing behind her in waves. Her skin had a faint silver sheen, and her eyes were a deep purple that seemed to look right through you. She was tall, maybe 7 feet, with a presence that made everyone instinctively step back. Behind her came a procession of advisors and guards, all wearing the black and silver uniforms of the imperial court. They moved in perfect formation, faces neutral, hands near their weapons. The Xantharians didn't believe in looking weak, and they definitely didn't believe in being casual. And then James saw her. Almost hidden behind the wall of officials, moving so quietly you could miss her entirely. Princess Lyra. She couldn't have been more than 16, maybe 17 in human years. Her anti-gravity chair hummed softly as it glided across the floor, its blue glow reflecting off the polished marble. She wore simpler robes than her mother, a pale blue that made her seem even smaller than she was. Her violet eyes were fixed on the floor, and she kept her hands folded tightly in her lap. The banquet began with all the usual ceremony. Speeches about cooperation between species. Toasts to lasting peace and mutual prosperity. The kind of careful, practiced words that diplomats used when they were really just sizing each other up. James and the other servers moved between tables like ghosts, refilling wine glasses and clearing plates with practiced efficiency. But James kept noticing the princess. While her mother sat at the head table, deep in conversation with Earth's representatives, Lyra had been positioned near the observation window. Away from the main action. Away from the crowds. Just her and her chair and the view of the stars. She wasn't eating. She wasn't talking to anyone. She just sat there, staring out at the blackness of space, watching the distant ships come and go. Something about it bothered James. Maybe it was because he had a younger sister back on Earth who used to get that same look when she felt left out. That expression of someone who was present but not really included. He made a decision. Grabbing a small dessert plate from the kitchen, James loaded it with samples of the evening's best offerings. Chocolate mousse, fresh raspberry tart, and a scoop of real vanilla ice cream. The good stuff they saved for special occasions. He approached the princess's table slowly, making sure not to startle her. "Excuse me, Your Highness," he said, keeping his voice gentle and friendly. "I thought you might enjoy trying some Earth desserts. We humans are pretty serious about our sweets." Lyra's head snapped up so fast it was almost comical. Her eyes went wide, and for a moment she just stared at him like he'd spoken in an alien language. Which technically he had. "You're speaking to me?" she asked in perfect English, though her accent made the words sound musical. "Yeah, I hope that's okay," James said, setting the plate down. "I'm James, by the way. Head waiter. And before you say you're not hungry, just trust me on the chocolate. That stuff is basically magic." Lyra looked at the plate, then back at James, then at the plate again. Her hands moved uncertainly, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to just take food from someone. "I may eat this," she whispered. "Of course. That's why I brought it over." James smiled. "No strings attached. Well, except maybe you'll want more tomorrow. Fair warning, we've had ambassadors request chocolate shipments to their home worlds. It's that good." Very carefully, Lyra picked up the small spoon. She scooped up a tiny bit of the mousse and brought it to her lips. The moment it touched her tongue, her entire expression transformed. Her eyes went huge, her mouth opened slightly, and she made a small sound of pure surprise. "This is incredible," she breathed. "What is this called again?" "Chocolate mousse. Made from cocoa beans that grow on Earth. Took humanity a few thousand years to perfect the recipe, but I'd say we nailed it." For the first time that evening, Lyra smiled. It was small, almost hesitant, but it was real. "Your delegation is here all week for the negotiations, right?" James asked. "I could bring you something different each night if you want. We've got this strawberry cheesecake that'll blow your mind. And don't even get me started on the tiramisu." "I would like that," Lyra said softly. "Very much." James nodded and started to head back to his duties, but he felt eyes on him. Looking up, he caught the Empress staring directly at him from across the room. Her expression was unreadable, that carefully controlled diplomatic face that gave nothing away. Next to her, a tall Xantharian in military uniform leaned close and whispered something. The Empress raised one clawed hand in a stopping gesture, her gaze never leaving James. Great, he thought. Either I just made a really good impression or I'm about to cause an intergalactic incident over chocolate mousse. But when he glanced back at Princess Lyra, she was taking another bite of dessert, and that small smile was still on her face. She looked less alone somehow. Less invisible. James figured that was worth whatever consequences might come. The evening continued with more speeches and formal dancing from various species. But James kept watching that corner table. And he noticed that the Empress kept watching too, her purple eyes tracking every moment her daughter seemed just a little less sad. Something had shifted in that room. Something small but significant. And neither James nor the Empress quite knew what to make of it yet. The peace negotiations were grinding into their third day, and honestly they weren't going well. James could tell from the tense faces of the diplomats as they filed out of the conference rooms. The Xantharians wanted trade routes. Earth wanted cultural exchange programs. Nobody seemed willing to budge. But James had noticed something else during those 3 days. Every afternoon around 2 o'clock, Princess Lyra would slip away from the diplomatic quarters and make her way to the observation deck. Always alone. Always quiet. Like she was trying not to be noticed. On Tuesday, James finished his lunch shift early and decided to take a chance. He stopped by the kitchen and prepared 2 cups of hot chocolate, the real kind with whipped cream and a sprinkle of cinnamon. Then he headed to the observation deck. Sure enough, there she was. Lyra sat in her anti-gravity chair near the massive viewing window, watching a huge cargo freighter slowly maneuver into its docking clamp. The stars stretched out beyond it, endless and cold and beautiful. James approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. Mind if I join you? I brought hot chocolate. It's basically the mousse from the other night, except you can drink it. Lyra turned, and for a moment he thought she might say no. But then she gestured to the empty space beside her chair. Please. Sit. James settled down on the bench and handed her one of the cups. She took it with both hands, feeling its warmth, and took a cautious sip. Her eyes lit up immediately. You humans have a gift for making food that tastes like happiness, she said. That's the nicest compliment I've gotten all week, James laughed. See that ship out there? The big one with the green running lights? That's an Earth cargo vessel. Probably carrying grain and manufactured goods to the outer colonies. And that smaller one just coming in on the left, the silver one? That's from the Andorian Collective. They're traders mostly. Good people. Excellent at negotiating. How do you know all this? Lyra asked, genuinely curious. You work at a space station long enough, you learn to recognize who's who. Each species has their own ship design, their own style. It's like reading a language, except with engines and hull plating. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the ships come and go. It was peaceful up here, away from the political tension and formal dinners. Just 2 people drinking hot chocolate and watching the universe go about its business. Do you like working here? Lyra asked suddenly, her voice soft. Being a waiter, I mean. Serving people. James thought about it. Most days, yeah. I get to meet people from literally across the galaxy. Hear their stories. Learn about their cultures. Food has this way of bringing people together, you know? Doesn't matter if you're from Earth or some planet I can't even pronounce. Everyone needs to eat. Everyone appreciates good food. It's universal. Lyra was quiet for a long moment. On my world, I don't get to meet many people. Mother keeps me protected. That's the word she uses. Protected. James heard everything she didn't say in that one word. Hidden. Sheltered. Kept away from public view. That sounds lonely, he said simply. It is. Lyra's fingers tightened around her cup. Very lonely. James took a sip of his chocolate, choosing his words carefully. You know what my grandmother used to tell me when I was a kid? She'd say that every single person has something beautiful to offer the world. Sometimes the problem isn't the person. The problem is that the world needs better eyes to see what's right in front of them. Lyra looked down at her legs, lifeless and thin beneath her robes. Some things cannot be beautiful. Some things are just broken. Who told you that? James asked, and there was an edge to his voice now. Everyone. Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. Our culture values strength above all else. Physical perfection. The ability to conquer and dominate. I am none of those things. I am weak. Incomplete. A failure of genetics. James felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept it controlled. Getting mad wouldn't help her. On Earth, we spent a really long time being incredibly stupid about stuff like this. I'm talking centuries. We told people they were worth less because of how they looked or how their bodies worked or what they could or couldn't do. We built entire societies around the idea that there was one right way to have a body, one right way to move through the world. What changed? Lyra asked. People started speaking up. Started saying, hey, maybe the problem isn't us. Maybe the problem is how you built everything. And slowly, really slowly, we started to listen. We figured out that different doesn't mean less. That bodies come in all kinds of configurations and every single one of them is valid. Is real. Is worthy of respect and dignity. Your world sounds gentler than mine, Lyra said, and there was longing in her voice. Took us a while to get there. We're still working on it, honestly. But yeah, we try. We believe that everyone deserves a shot at happiness, regardless of how their body works. James hesitated, then decided to just ask. Have you ever danced? Lyra's entire body went rigid. Her expression shut down completely, walls slamming into place. I cannot dance. That should be obvious. That's not what I asked. I asked if you've ever tried. Why would I try something that's impossible? Lyra's voice had gone cold, defensive. Is it impossible? Or is it just impossible the way your culture defines dancing? Lyra stared at him like he was speaking nonsense. I cannot stand. I cannot walk. Dancing requires legs that function. This is not a complicated equation. Dancing requires movement and music and joy, James countered. Last time I checked, you're capable of all three of those things. On my world it would be inappropriate. Offensive even. I lack the completeness of form required for such activities. It would be seen as mockery. James set his cup down and turned to face her fully. That's honestly the saddest thing I've ever heard. The idea that you've been told your whole life that certain kinds of happiness are just off limits because your body doesn't match some arbitrary standard of perfection. Lyra didn't respond. She was staring at her hands, her jaw tight. For what it's worth, James said gently, I think you'd be a great dancer. You don't know that. Maybe not. But I know you deserve the chance to find out. Near the entrance to the observation deck, hidden in the shadows, Empress Velshera stood completely still. She'd come looking for her daughter, worried when Lyra had slipped away from her attendants again. But now she couldn't move. Couldn't interrupt. She watched her daughter talk more openly, more honestly than she'd ever heard. Watched this human treat Lyra not as a princess who needed protecting, not as a disabled child who needed pity, but as a person who deserved to be listened to. The Empress had spent 16 years building walls around her daughter, keeping her safe from a culture that would judge her, diminish her, see her as less than. She thought she was being a good mother. But listening now, hearing the loneliness in her daughter's voice, she wondered if she'd been wrong about everything. The final night of negotiations had arrived, and Gateway Olympus had transformed itself into something magical. The diplomatic restaurant had been cleared of tables, creating an open space in the center. Lights of every color danced across the walls, and the air buzzed with excitement and nervous energy. Tonight wasn't about treaties or trade agreements. Tonight was about culture. Each species present would share something from their home world, a glimpse into who they were beyond politics and power. The Andrelians went first, their gossamer wings catching the light as they performed aerial acrobatics that defied physics. They swooped and spun through the air like living ribbons, drawing gasps from the crowd. Then came the Korvathi, demonstrating their ceremonial combat rituals with precision that was equal parts beautiful and terrifying. The Tellurian choir followed, their voices blending in harmonics that humans weren't meant to hear, making the crystal glasses on nearby tables vibrate and hum. Each performance was met with respectful applause. Each species had brought their best, their proudest traditions to share. And then it was Earth's turn. James caught the eye of his fellow human staff members and nodded. They'd planned this carefully. The lights dimmed to something softer, warmer. And then the music began. Just smooth and soulful. A saxophone crooned out a melody while piano keys danced underneath it. The kind of music that got into your bones and made you want to move, even if you didn't know how. Several humans began swaying where they stood. Nothing formal or choreographed. Just movement. Just feeling the rhythm. Two servers paired up and began a slow dance. Another moved solo, eyes closed, just letting the music guide them. It was simple. It was human. It was real. And then James did something that made the entire room go silent. He walked directly across the floor toward Princess Lyra's table. Every step felt like it took forever. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him, but he kept his focus on the princess, who was watching him with wide, confused eyes. He stopped in front of the head table and bowed formally to Empress Velshera. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it over the music. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "With your permission, I would like to ask the princess to dance." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Several alien diplomats exchanged shocked glances. The Xantharian guards shifted, their hands moving closer to their weapons. Everyone present understood what this looked like. Asking a disabled royal to perform something impossible could be interpreted as mockery, as an insult, as a deliberate act of disrespect that could destroy the entire week's worth of careful negotiations. Commander Thex, the Empress's head of security, stepped forward. His hand was already on his weapon. "Human, you dare." "Wait." The Empress's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She raised one hand, stopping her guard mid-sentence. She stared at James for a long moment, those purple eyes searching his face. Looking for cruelty. Looking for some hidden agenda. Looking for political calculation or mockery or any of the thousand ways this could be a trap. She found none of it. She saw only sincerity and a quiet kind of hope. The Empress turned to her daughter. "Lyra," she said slowly, carefully. "The choice is yours." Every eye in the room turned to the princess. Lyra's hands were trembling in her lap. Her face had gone pale. This was insane. This was impossible. This was everything she'd been taught she could never do, never be, never even attempt. Dancing was for the whole. For the perfect. For those whose bodies obeyed their commands. Dancing required strength and grace and completeness of form. All the things she'd been told her entire life that she lacked. But she remembered sitting on the observation deck. Remembered James saying that everyone deserved a chance at happiness. Remembered the way he looked at her like she was just a person, not a problem to be solved or hidden away. "Yes," Lyra whispered. Her voice was so quiet that almost no one heard it. Then louder, stronger, "Yes. I want to dance." The room erupted in whispers. James ignored them all. He approached Lyra carefully, moving slow enough that she could tell him to stop at any moment. "Okay," he said softly, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. "I'm going to lift you now. One arm is going to go behind your back for support. The other hand will hold yours. You're in control here. If you want me to stop, if you want to sit back down, you just say the word. No questions asked. Deal?" Lyra nodded, not trusting her voice. James stood and gently, carefully, lifted her from the anti-gravity chair. She was lighter than he expected, her legs hanging limp and lifeless. But her upper body was strong. He could feel the tension in her shoulders, the way her muscles worked to keep herself upright. He positioned his arms securely behind her back, supporting her weight. His other hand clasped hers. And then, moving to the slow rhythm of the jazz, he began to sway. Just small movements at first. A gentle rock from side to side. Letting Lyra feel the motion, get used to the sensation of moving through space without her chair beneath her. Lyra gasped. She was moving. Actually moving with the music. Her body was following the rhythm, carried by James but participating, active, part of the dance. James began to turn slowly, careful circles that made her robes swirl slightly. He dipped just a little, then rose. Swayed left, then right. Nothing complicated. Nothing flashy. Just pure, simple movement in time with the music. "I'm dancing," Lyra breathed, and her voice was filled with such wonder that it made James's chest tight. "I'm actually dancing." Her hand gripped his shoulder tighter, not out of fear but out of excitement. Her eyes were shining, reflecting the soft lights. And then she laughed, a sound of pure, unfiltered joy that rang out across the silent room. Empress Velshera rose from her seat without realizing she'd done it. Her hands were pressed to her chest. Something was breaking open inside her, something she'd kept locked away for 16 years. She was watching her daughter dance. Her daughter, who had been told by countless doctors and cultural leaders and well-meaning advisors that such things were beyond her capabilities. Her daughter, who had spent her entire life being carefully, lovingly hidden away from a world that wouldn't understand. Her daughter was dancing. And she was radiant. James continued the slow turns, reading Lyra's body language, making sure she was comfortable and stable. The saxophone sang out its melody, the piano kept its steady rhythm, and in the center of the room, a human waiter and an alien princess moved together like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like dancing had nothing to do with legs and everything to do with heart. As James and Lyra moved across the floor, something unexpected began to happen. The other humans in the room started to join in. Not rushing forward. Not making a spectacle. Just quietly, naturally, adding their own movement to the moment. A woman named Beth stepped onto the floor, dancing alone. She moved with confidence and grace, her prosthetic leg catching the soft lights with each step. The metal and carbon fiber glinted as she spun, turning what some cultures might see as a limitation into something that sparkled like jewelry. She wasn't hiding it. She was just dancing, and the prosthetic was simply part of who she was. Near the back, two men swayed together in a slow, intimate dance. One of them, Greg, was in a wheelchair, but that didn't stop them. His husband Danny pushed the chair gently, making it spin and glide as they moved. They were laughing together, foreheads nearly touching, completely lost in their own world. The wheelchair wasn't an obstacle to overcome. It was just part of their dance, part of their story. An older gentleman, maybe in his 70s, danced with exaggerated, joyful movements near the observation window. His hands trembled noticeably, some kind of condition that made them shake. But he didn't seem to care. He threw his arms wide, moved his feet in shuffling steps, and beamed like he was 20 years old again. The trembling just added its own rhythm to his movement. More humans joined. A young woman with hearing aids danced to the vibrations she could feel through the floor. A man with a cane used it as part of his dance, tapping it in time with the music. Someone else moved from a seated position, upper body swaying and arms flowing like water. The music swelled, the saxophone hitting a beautiful high note that seemed to lift everyone in the room. Someone laughed. Then someone else. And then Lyra laughed, a pure, unrestrained sound of absolute joy that cut through everything else. It was the kind of laugh that came from deep inside, the kind you can't fake or force. The kind that only happens when something touches your soul in a way you didn't know was possible. Empress Velshera felt something crack deep inside her chest. She'd spent her entire life in a culture that valued physical perfection above all else. Strength, completeness, the ability to dominate and conquer. Her empire had built itself on the idea that weakness was shameful, that anything less than perfect should be hidden away, protected from sight. But these humans weren't pretending that disability didn't exist. They weren't ignoring it or trying to hide it behind polite fiction. They were doing something she'd never even considered possible. They were celebrating it. Not the disability itself, but the person, the movement, the joy. They were saying, as loudly and clearly as possible without speaking a single word, that happiness wasn't something you earned by being perfect. It was something you chose, something you claimed regardless of how your body worked or didn't work. They were saying that every body was a good body. That every form of movement was valid. That dancing wasn't about having the right kind of legs or the right kind of coordination. It was about feeling music and expressing joy and being fully, completely alive in whatever way you could manage. The Empress watched her daughter's face, and it was like seeing her for the first time. Lyra was radiant. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she was smiling so wide it must have hurt. Her eyes were bright and alive in a way the Empress hadn't seen since she was a small child, before she'd understood what her condition meant in their culture. James guided Lyra through another slow turn, and she threw her head back slightly, feeling the movement, the music, the pure freedom of it all. She was flying. She was weightless. She was doing something she'd been told her entire life was impossible, and it was even better than she'd imagined. In that moment, she wasn't the disabled princess who had to be hidden away. She wasn't the genetic failure or the embarrassment to the throne. She was just Lyra, dancing at a party, feeling happy and alive and wonderfully, perfectly herself. When the final notes of the saxophone faded away, the room remained silent for a heartbeat. Then applause erupted from every corner. Not polite, diplomatic applause, but real, genuine appreciation. James carefully, gently returned Lyra to her anti-gravity chair. As soon as she was settled, she grabbed his hand with both of hers, holding tight like she was afraid he might disappear. "Thank you," she said, and her voice cracked with emotion. "Thank you for showing me I could." James squeezed her hands gently. "You always could, Lyra. You always had it in you. You just needed someone to believe it with you." Lyra turned immediately to her mother, and words came tumbling out so fast they almost ran together. "Did you see? Mother, did you see? I danced. I actually danced. It was like floating but so much better, and the music went through my whole body and I could feel everything, and it was amazing, and I never want to stop." And Empress Velshera did something then that shocked everyone in the room, including her own guards. She knelt beside her daughter's chair. Not a slight bow. Not a formal acknowledgement. She actually knelt, putting herself below her daughter's eye level, something Xantharian royalty never did in public. She looked up at James with an expression that was part confusion, part awe, part something else entirely. Something vulnerable and raw. "How?" she asked simply. Just that one word, but it contained volumes. "How do your people see what we cannot?" James thought about his answer carefully. This wasn't just a question about dancing. This was about worldview. About culture. About what it meant to be valuable as a person. We learned, he said slowly, that the problem was never with people like Lyra. The problem was with how we built our world. How we decided what was normal and what wasn't. How we defined worth and value and capability. He gestured to the other humans still on the dance floor. Once we fixed our perspective, once we started actually listening to people instead of making assumptions about what they could or couldn't do, everything else followed. We stopped asking, "What's wrong with you?" and started asking, "What do you need from us?" The Empress looked at her daughter, really looked at her, seeing the joy still radiating from her face. "We have been asking the wrong questions," she whispered. "Yeah," James said gently. "I think maybe you have." The peace negotiations wrapped up successfully 2 days later. Treaties were signed, trade agreements were finalized, and diplomats from both sides smiled for the cameras. Everyone seemed satisfied with the outcome. But Empress Velshera had one more request before leaving Gateway Olympus. She didn't ask for another meeting with Earth's ambassadors or trade ministers. She asked for James. They met on the observation deck, the same place where James and Lyra had shared hot chocolate and talked about ships and loneliness. The station was quieter now, most of the diplomatic delegations having already departed. It was just the two of them and the stars. James wasn't sure what to expect. You didn't usually get summoned by an empress for a casual chat. "Sit please," Velshera said, gesturing to the bench. Her tone was different than it had been during the formal dinners. Less imperial. More human, ironically enough. James sat, and for a moment they just looked out at the vastness of space together. "Tell me about your world's philosophy," the Empress said finally. "Regarding those who are different. I need to understand how your people think about this." James took a breath, trying to organize his thoughts. This was important. He could feel it. "We have this concept called the social model of disability," he began. "It's the idea that people aren't disabled by their bodies. They're disabled by societies that don't accommodate them. Like, if we build a world that only has stairs and no ramps, that's not because legs are the only valid way to move around. That's just us being lazy and unimaginative. The problem isn't the person who uses a wheelchair. The problem is that we built stairs and called it done." The Empress listened intently. "But surely some limitations are real? Physical facts that cannot be changed." "Some, yeah," James admitted. "But way fewer than you'd think once you actually start asking people what they need instead of assuming what they can't do. And here's the thing, even when limitations are real, they don't determine someone's worth. They don't determine their potential for happiness or contribution or living a full life. A person's value doesn't come from how well their body matches some arbitrary standard of normal." "Your people believe this?" Velshera asked. "Truly?" "Not all of us, not always perfectly. We mess up plenty. But yeah, that's the direction we've been moving for the last few centuries. We figured out that diversity makes us stronger, not weaker. That different perspectives and different ways of moving through the world actually solve problems we didn't even know we had." The Empress was quiet for a long moment, her purple eyes reflecting the starlight. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I have spent 16 years trying to protect my daughter by hiding her. Keeping her away from court politics, from public appearances, from anything that might expose her to judgment or cruelty. I thought I was being a good mother. I thought I was keeping her safe." "You were working with what your culture taught you," James said gently. "You can't blame yourself for that. But I was wrong." The Empress's voice cracked slightly. "I was so focused on protecting her from the world that I never stopped to think maybe the world was what needed to change, not her. Now you know different," James said. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" The Empress turned to look at him fully, and there was steel in her gaze now. "I am going to change everything." And she did. 6 months later, news reached Gateway Olympus that the Xantharian High Council had passed something called the Accessibility Reform Act. It mandated that all public buildings be modified to accommodate different forms of mobility. It created legal protections for citizens with disabilities. It established educational programs to shift cultural attitudes. The vote hadn't been unanimous. There had been pushback from traditionalists who insisted this was weakening the empire. But Empress Velshera had pushed it through anyway, using every bit of political power she had. And Princess Lyra? She'd been appointed as the first ever ambassador of inclusion. She traveled to allied worlds, sharing her story, advocating for change, showing other species that the Xantharian Empire was serious about this transformation. 2 years after that first dance, Empress Velshera returned to Gateway Olympus for another diplomatic summit. James was in the middle of training a new server when he got word that the Empress had personally requested his presence at the opening reception. He arrived nervous, unsure what to expect. Had he somehow offended her? Was there some diplomatic incident he didn't know about? The Empress approached him through the crowd, and James immediately noticed something different. She moved with a slight asymmetry, favoring her right side. And she carried a cane, elegant and artistic, made of some dark metal with silver inlay that caught the light. "Walk with me," she said, and though it was phrased as a command, her tone was warm, almost friendly. They moved through the station together, the Empress setting a comfortable pace. James noticed that she didn't try to hide the cane or minimize her limp. She moved like someone who had nothing to be ashamed of. "Military engagement," she explained, noticing his glance. 6 months ago. Shrapnel damage to the hip. The old me would have hidden in the palace until it healed, or worn some device to mask the injury. But I find I've learned a few things about perspective. "I'm glad you're okay," James said. "My daughter graduates from the Diplomatic Academy next month," Velshera said, and there was unmistakable pride in her voice. "Top of her class. She's giving the commencement speech. She's changing our entire empire from within, one mind at a time. And it all started because you showed her she wasn't broken." "I didn't really do anything," James protested. "I just asked her to dance." "You did everything." The Empress stopped walking and turned to face him. "You showed her that humanity's true strength isn't your technology or your weapons or your economic power. It's your fundamental belief that every being, regardless of form or function, deserves dignity and respect and the chance to experience joy. That simple belief changed my daughter's life. And through her, it's changing an entire empire." She extended her hand, palm up. "An invitation. Would you honor me with a dance, James? I find I've developed quite an appreciation for your earth jazz." James smiled and took her hand. The reception had music playing softly in the background, and he guided the Empress into a slow, simple dance. She moved carefully but confidently, the cane set aside, trusting him to help her balance. As they swayed to the music, Velshera thought about everything that had changed. About her daughter, confident and radiant, traveling the galaxy as an ambassador. About the thousands of Xantharian citizens who were finally being seen as full members of society instead of problems to hide. About the schools and buildings and entire cities being redesigned with accessibility in mind. All because one human waiter had believed, simply and completely, that everyone deserved their moment to dance. "Thank you," the Empress said quietly as the song ended. "For everything you didn't even know you were giving us." James smiled. "That's what humans do best. We share what we have. Even if it's just a dance and some chocolate mousse." The Empress laughed, a sound James had never heard from her before. It was genuine and warm and full of hope for a future that looked nothing like the past. And somewhere across the galaxy, Princess Lyra was preparing her graduation speech, ready to tell the next generation of Xantharian diplomats that strength came in many forms, and that the truly powerful were those brave enough to dance.